Once upon a time, have you ever caught yourself thinking that the scariest thing in life isn't slowly sliding downhill, but when everything collapses too fast? That's exactly what happened to me. I was only 19 when I realized I'd managed to wreck my life faster than some people pick out a new iPhone. Funny, right? But I swear it's no joke. I was an ordinary guy from the suburbs in Ohio. My family was normal. Dad was a mechanic at a local auto shop. Mom worked at an elementary school. We weren't getting rich, but we weren't starving either. I had my own used Ford Focus, school uniform, a couple of friends, an Xbox, and parents who really believed I'd make something of myself. And at that point, I believed it too. At 18, I got into university, a small college in a neighboring state. Nothing fancy, not Harvard, of course, but for a guy like me, it was already a success. Mom cried tears of joy when the whole family dropped me off at campus. I remember her folding my t-shirts on the shelf and saying, "Son, the main thing is, don't get too wild there." I laughed then. "Mom, come on, I'm an adult. Everything will be okay." Yeah, sure. College seemed like paradise in the first few weeks. You're finally on your own without parents. Do whatever you want. Eat pizza for breakfast, sleep until noon, play Call of Duty all night. Freedom. And I took full advantage of that freedom. A couple of days after moving in, my roommate, a guy named Josh, invited me. He was a year older, already in a fraternity, and looked like a dude who definitely knew where the action was. "Hey Nick," he said, "we have a party tonight, wanna come?" Of course I did. And that's how I ended up at my first campus party. Imagine, loud music, tons of beer, everyone dancing, yelling, laughing. I stood in the middle of that crowd and thought, this is it, real college life. That night I got so drunk that the next day I barely made it back to my room. But back then it seemed funny, like, haha, I'm a real student now. There are people who don't like drinking. I'm not one of them. I liked it, a lot. Alcohol made me bolder, more outgoing. I could approach any girl, crack a joke, and it worked. I could say anything and people laughed. Sober me was an ordinary guy, a bit shy. Drunk me was the life of the party. It was like a superpower, but superpowers usually come with super problems. At first, I lived off my parents' money and worked a bit at a nearby Starbucks. Honestly, I hated that job, getting up at 5 in the morning, making lattes for people who don't even look you in the eye. But it gave me a couple $100 a month. And that's when I got introduced to betting. "Dude," Josh said to me one day, while we were watching an NFL game in his room, "you know you can make a ton of money if you bet on the right team." I laughed. "What ton? I can barely afford gas for my car." He showed me an app. "Look, I bet $100 on the Cowboys and won 200, easy as pie." And that's when something clicked in me. I'd always loved sports. Basketball, football, baseball, I knew my stuff. And the idea of making money just because I'm good at predicting outcomes seemed genius. My first bet was on the NBA. I put down $50, won $120. It was the worst and best day at the same time. Best because I felt like a king. Worst because that's when I got hooked. When you're drinking almost every weekend and spending money on bets, the right people start showing up around you. Not the ones who pull you up, but the ones who are happy to slide down with you. It was at one of those parties that I met Kelly. She was one of those girls who immediately draws attention, blonde, loud laugh, confident. We started dating almost right away. At first, everything was fun. Late-night runs to Taco Bell, playing beer pong together, trips to Lake Erie with friends. But Kelly had one quirk. She liked to spice up parties. It was from her that I first heard, "Wanna try something cooler than beer?" I said yes. And that's how I first tried a pill she called a little fun, MDMA. At that moment, it seemed harmless. The music got louder, people brighter, life cooler. And the next day, I woke up feeling like I needed not just a cup of coffee, but something more. My parents called sometimes. How's school? Son, you look tired in your photos. Of course, I lied. Everything's great, Mom, just a lot of homework. Dad usually stayed quiet, but I could sense some distrust in his voice. You know when parents suspect but don't push yet. That's how it was. And as a real adult, I decided, screw it, they won't find out. By the end of the first semester, I was skipping classes more often than attending them. Professors knew me as that guy who's always missing. My grades were slipping, but I still thought, I'll catch up next semester. The problem was, I was already living a double life. By day, sort of a student. By night, partier gambler, a guy who spends money faster than he earns it. And the scariest part, I didn't even see it as a problem. One time, I went to Walmart at night with friends. We were hammered, and I decided it would be hilarious to ride around the store in a cart like in Mario Kart. I actually crashed into a chip display. The security guard almost called the police. The next day I woke up and thought, dude, that was close. But instead of learning from it, I just laughed. That was my philosophy. It worked out once means I can keep going. That's the sneakiest part. As long as things are still holding together, you think you're in control. I still had friends. I had a girlfriend. I even had money well sometimes. And I thought, if I'm still alive and no one's kicked me out, everything's fine. In reality, at that point, my life was already plummeting. I just hadn't hit rock bottom yet. Sometimes life is like a video game. You start on easy mode, everything seems fun and simple. But then suddenly, hard mode kicks in and you didn't even notice how it happened. That's exactly what it was like for me. Everything seemed fine. Parties, friends, bets, Kelly. I considered myself a real student, free, independent, living life to the fullest. But the problem was that reality was slowly catching up to me. When I arrived at college, I had a small savings account that my parents set up for me back in school. There was about $2,000, a gift from Grandpa plus some odd jobs. By the end of the first semester, that account was almost zero. Where did the money go? Let's tally it up. $30, $40 every weekend on pizza and beer. $50, $100 on bets. Sometimes I won, but more often lost. Gas for the car. I still drove home occasionally. And of course, little adventures, like pills from Kelly. When I realized the money was running out, I didn't panic. I just told myself, this is America, there's always a way. And one day near campus, I saw some guys at a table with a sign. Free t-shirt if you sign up for a credit card. Free t-shirt. I signed up right away. A week later, I had a shiny new credit card with a $1,500 limit. I thought, oh, cool, now I'll always have money. Yeah, right. I was still working at Starbucks, getting up at 5 a.m., making cappuccinos for office workers and hating every second. But it was my alibi. My parents thought I was working and studying. Truth is, after my shift, I didn't go to the library. I went to the bar or to friends in the frat. School gradually became secondary, something I could catch up on later. Lying to my parents became routine. How's school? Everything super, keeping my GPA up. In reality, my GPA was sliding toward 2, which was a disaster for any student. I started using the credit card actively. At first for small things, food, gas, a pair of new sneakers. But then it escalated. I started betting with the credit card. And that's when the first serious shit hit me. I remember it was an NBA game. I was absolutely sure the Lakers would win. Bet $300, lost. Then decided to win it back and bet another $400 on a different game, lost again. A month later, my credit card balance was already $1,200, and I had nothing to pay with. But I kept going anyway, because one thought was stuck in my head, one more bet and I'll get it all back. Kelly was still around. She was that girl who always knew where the party was. Seemed cool, but sometimes I felt like she was pushing me further than I was ready to go. One day she said, "Listen, I have a friend who can get something cooler than pills. Wanna try?" I got scared. I said no. And that was probably the only time I showed a bit of common sense. But the fact that I was around people who casually offered me drugs should have been a red flag. I just ignored it. The second semester was worse than the first. I skipped everything. Sometimes I didn't even remember I had an exam. One professor said, "Nick, if you miss class one more time, I'll fail you." I nodded and missed it. I started getting used to the idea that college was just a backdrop for my new life. Parties, bets, girlfriend, alcohol. That was the reality. School, who needs it? I remember one time, Josh and a couple of guys and I drove into town at night for booze. We were drunk, but decided it's okay. I was in the passenger seat, Josh driving. Naturally, we got pulled over by the police. The officer approached and immediately knew we were drunk. I thought, that's it, we're getting arrested. But Josh somehow talked his way out, said we were just tired students coming from the library. The officer was nice or just didn't want the hassle, but he let us go. At that moment I should have realized this isn't a game. Next time we might not be so lucky, but I brushed it off again. Dodged it. In the spring I came home for break. Mom looked at me and immediately asked, "Are you okay? You look pale." I said, "Nah, everything's fine, just a lot of studying." But Dad came up to me that evening and said quietly, "Nick, don't lie, I can see something's wrong with you." I looked him in the eyes and said, "Dad, everything's under control." You know what's ironic? At that moment, I really believed everything was under control. Even though my debt had topped $2,000, my GPA was on the edge and I was drinking almost every day. One time, Mom came into my room and saw a letter from the bank. On the envelope in big letters, "Past due," she asked. "What is this?" I snatched the envelope and said, "Oh, it's spam, don't worry about it." She shrugged and left, and I sat on the bed thinking, dude, you're really on the edge, but okay, since Mom didn't notice, everything's fine. That was my logic. As long as no one catches me red-handed, no problems. By the end of the second semester, I was a completely different person. Tired, constantly in debt, my head filled not with studies but with bets and parties. But the scariest part, I started getting used to it. It seemed normal, waking up with a hangover, going to my Starbucks shift, then partying until morning and skipping classes the next day. I thought everyone lives like this. In reality, everyone around me was moving forward, some actually studying, some building careers, some at least staying within bounds. And me? I was on a roller coaster that wasn't stopping. You know, in movies, they usually show the moment when the hero's life falls apart. He loses the girl, the money, the job, and it's like one big blow. In real life, it's a bit different. It falls apart gradually in small pieces. But one day you wake up and realize, dude, your life is officially in the shitter. For me, that moment came in my second year of college. The credit card I got for the free t-shirt was maxed out. $1,500 limit turned into $1,500 debt, plus fees, interest. I tried to make minimum payments, but there wasn't enough money. One day I got a letter. Your account has been sent to collections. Collections. 19 years old and my debt's already sold to collectors. Beautiful, huh? But as always, instead of panicking, I decided, okay, I still have another credit card. And I got a new one. Its limit was $2,000. I spent almost all of it in 3 months. On what? Bets, pizza, alcohol, and new sneakers I didn't even need. The irony is, I was buying things to seem normal, even though I was neck-deep in crap. My GPA dropped to 1.8. That's below the minimum threshold. I got a letter from the university. You are on academic probation. In short, one more semester like this, and I'm out. I remember sitting with that letter thinking, Okay, I just need to try harder. Only I didn't try, I went to the bar. My relationship with Kelly started cracking too. At first, it was all fun, parties, romance, late-night fast food runs. But then the fights started. She'd often say, "Nick, are you even going to do anything about school? Come on, I'll figure it out later." She got mad and I'd leave. One time we fought so bad that she just left the party with another guy. I pretended I didn't care, but inside it really hit me. A week later she texted, "We need some time." In girl speak, that meant we're done. I was left alone, and you know what I did? I went to the bar again. That summer I came home. I tried to hide that everything was bad, but my parents could sense it. Mom found another bank letter and asked, "Nick, why are collectors calling you?" I started spouting some nonsense about bank error. She didn't buy it. Dad sat down with me that evening and said, "Son, if you keep lying, it'll only get worse." I remember feeling everything flip inside me, but I still said, "Nah, everything's under control." In reality, control was long gone. I tried to hold on to my Starbucks job, but I started showing up late. A few times I didn't show up at all because of hangovers. The manager called me in and said, "Nick, I like you, but if this happens again, I'll have to fire you." Of course, it happened again. A week later, I didn't show up, and I got fired. Now I had no money, no job, no girlfriend. I remember one episode. I went to the campus library to prep for an exam. In reality, I just sat at the laptop making bets. An acquaintance came up and asked, "Hey Nick, what are you studying?" And on my screen was the betting app. I froze and said, Statistics." He looked at the screen and said, "Yeah, Lakers statistics." We both laughed, but I was so ashamed. I looked like a clown who wasn't even trying to hide that he was failing. At one point, everything converged. Both credit cards got blocked for non-payment. The college sent a letter saying I could be expelled. My parents stopped sending money because they started suspecting my lies. Kelly stopped responding. I sat in my campus room, staring at the ceiling, thinking, "Dude, you're only 19, and you've screwed up like some people don't in a lifetime." And you know what I did at that moment? I went to the bar, of course. One night after the bar, I was walking across campus and decided to borrow a bike that was unlocked. I thought, come on, I'll return it tomorrow. But of course, campus police stopped me right then. The officer looked at me and said, "Kid, are you drunk?" "No, no, everything's fine." They took me to the station, called the dean. I got lucky. They didn't arrest me officially, but they recorded the violation. The dean said, "One more time and you're out." I nodded and said, "Yes, sir, never again." But I was thinking, okay, just don't get caught next time. One day, Dad called and said, "Son, I found your bills. You owe over $5,000. Do you understand what that means?" I started making excuses. "It's temporary, I'll pay it back." He said, "You're lying to yourself. Until you admit you have a problem, we won't help you." And hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand, and for the first time felt truly alone. One day, I went to the campus dining hall and realized my meal card credits were out. No money either. You know what I did? I stole someone's sandwich. Just sat at a stranger's table while the guy looked away and took it. And the dumbest part, the guy noticed. He came up and said, "Dude, seriously." I wanted to sink through the floor, but then I just pretended it was a joke. At the end of my second year, I got the official letter. "You are academically dismissed, expelled." I didn't tell my parents. I pretended everything was fine and just stayed on campus as if I was still studying. Lived in the room, made bets, partied. It was the complete end, but I was still pretending everything's under control. You know what's the scariest thing about falling? Not that you're falling, but that you don't even realize you've hit bottom until you try to dig deeper. It seemed like it couldn't get worse. I'd lost everything: school, girlfriend, job, family, trust. But in reality, that's when the real hell began. When I was officially expelled, I didn't tell anyone, especially not my parents. I kept living on campus for another couple of weeks until they asked me to move out. I pretended I was prepping for exams, but really I was just drinking beer and sitting online, betting on NBA games. It sounds absurd. I had no future, but I was still spending my last dollars trying to guess if some guy would make a three-pointer. One day, the campus manager came into the room and said, "Nick, your student status is revoked. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." I smiled and said, "Yeah, of course." But inside, everything collapsed. I packed my stuff, a couple of bags of clothes, an old laptop, sneakers, and realized I literally had nowhere to go. I called a couple of friends, but they said things like, "Bro, our loft is full." "Sorry, dude, living with my girl." 3 days later, I was officially homeless. The first week I crashed with acquaintances. On couches, on floors, even in my car. It seemed kind of fun, like I was free and carefree. We joked, "Oh, Nick's a free spirit now." But I knew it wasn't freedom, it was a complete lack of a plan. After a couple of weeks, everyone got tired of me. I started feeling like I was being tolerated. Money was running out. I sometimes did food delivery through DoorDash, but orders were rare, and I spent everything on booze. I remember one morning, I had $10 in my pocket. I stood there choosing, buy food or beer. I bought beer. I sat in the park drinking straight from the can, watching students heading to lectures. I thought I could be going there right now too, but I'm here, and I did this to myself. One day, I accidentally saw Kelly. She was walking across campus with some guy, laughing. I approached, wanted to talk, but she looked at me like, like someone she didn't know anymore. I said, "Hey, how are you?" She replied, "Nick, you need help, really, but not from me," and walked away. Those words stuck in my head, "not from me." I ran out of money completely. I went to Walmart and stole a bag of chips, just stuffed it in my jacket. On the way out, the security guard caught me. He didn't call the police but said, "Kid, seriously, for chips?" I was so ashamed, but I still ate those chips in my car. One time, a friend let me crash in his old pickup. I lay on the back seat, covered with a jacket, and froze so bad my teeth chattered. I stared at the ceiling thinking, "Dude, you're 20, and you're sleeping in someone's truck because you screwed up." That was the moment I first really got scared. The collectors found me. I got a letter, outstanding balance, $5,487, immediate payment required. I laughed loudly because I had $2 in my pocket. One day, I got drunk again and decided to borrow alcohol from a store. This time, they caught me and filed a report. It wasn't just a fine anymore. It was a real police record. I sat in the station, and the officer said, "You're too young to kill your life like this." I smirked, "Yeah, too late." My personal rock bottom happened one night. I was sitting at a bus stop with a paper bag of beer. No phone, it was shut off for non-payment. No money, no home. Students walked by just like I used to be. They laughed, discussed exams, made plans. And I sat there, dirty, smelly, thinking, I was one of them, and now I'm nobody. At that moment, I really understood. I destroyed my life, and I did it myself. I remember one morning, I woke up on a park bench. My head hurt, hands shook, mouth tasted like cheap beer. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It had been off for a week. The screen didn't light up. I had no food, no money, no home. I sat up, hugged my head, and for the first time in a long time cried. I was 20, bawling like a kid. Not because I felt sorry for myself, but because I realized I'd destroyed everything myself. That same day, I went to campus. I don't know why, it just pulled me there. Even though I'd been kicked out, the place still felt like home. And you know who I ran into? An old professor who taught psychology. He looked at me and said, "Nick, what are you doing here?" I tried to joke it off, but I looked like a zombie. In the end, I just said, "I got expelled, I have nothing left." And for the first time in months, I told the truth. He looked at me long and calmly, then said, "You think this is the end, but it's just the beginning. The question is, what will you do next?" I went to the library and for the first time in months, sat down not to bet, but to write a letter to my parents. In it I wrote everything, that I'd been expelled, that I was in debt, that I'd been drinking, that I'd lied. I didn't make excuses, just the truth. And I sent it. I thought they'd just tell me off, but 2 days later Mom replied, "We knew something was wrong. Come home. We'll figure out how to pull you out." I cried reading those words. Going home was insanely shameful. I walked into the house with a backpack and a bag of clothes, and Mom hugged me like I was still her little boy. Dad was cooler, he said. "I'm glad you told the truth, but from here on it's up to you." That was fair. That summer I got a job on a construction site, loading bricks, hauling cement. Hard, dirty work, but for the first time in a long time I was earning honest money. Every evening I came home exhausted but sober. And you know what? It was the best feeling in the last 2 years. I started paying off my debts, little by little, $5,100 at a time. Of course, $5,000 didn't disappear in a month, but it was a first step. One day I went back to Starbucks as a customer. The barista asked my name, I said Nick, and she wrote it on the cup. It sounds dumb, but I looked at that cup and thought, there it is. I'm a person again, just Nick. Not a liar, not a loser, not a runaway, just me. I wrote to Kelly again, not to get her back, but to apologize. I wrote, "You were right, I needed help, sorry for everything." She replied shortly, "I'm glad you realized, take care of yourself." That was enough. I didn't need her pity, I needed her forgiveness. Now I'm 21. I can't say life is back on track, I'm still in debt, no degree, living with my parents. But I've been sober for almost a year. I work. I'm learning to take responsibility. And most importantly, I don't lie to myself anymore. Why am I writing this? I know my story sounds like a textbook on how to quickly ruin your life. Ignore school. Get credit cards and drown in debt. Bet on easy money. Lie to parents. Lose friends and girlfriend. Dive into alcohol. Hide from the truth. And yeah, it works. You really can destroy everything in a couple of years. But I'm writing this because maybe someone out there is on the same path right now. Maybe you're a student thinking, one more semester and I'll sort it out. Maybe you're already drowning in debt. Maybe you think alcohol solves problems. Dude, I've been there. And you know what? It doesn't solve, it only destroys. My takeaway: if you have even the slightest chance to stop, stop now. Don't wait until you're at a bus stop with a bag of cheap beer and the thought that you're nobody. You can wreck life fast. Rebuilding takes longer, but it's still possible. And yeah, my name's Nick. I'm 21, and I'm still trying to piece my life back together. If you're reading this and thinking, this is about me, please don't repeat my mistake.